Welcome to Save As Ability, a podcast to educate and inform you about disability employment issues. My name is David D'Arcangelo, and I'm your disability policy expert. Picture walking into your neighborhood restaurant and there's a nice black lab lying quietly under the table, and you can't help but notice it because you like dogs, but the dog isn't a pet. The dog is medical equipment on four legs. We're going to talk about that today on Save As Ability. I'm going to talk about service animals. It's David D'Arcangelo. Great to have you back here. If you could please help us continue to grow our channel. Like, subscribe, share, comment. It really does help keep great content flowing for you. So, yeah, in that case, the dog isn't a pet. She's medical equipment on four legs. And the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, has parameters in it. And today we're going to talk about some of the myths, misunderstandings, and, unfortunately, we'll even talk about some of the discrimination that has occurred with service animals. So today we're going to talk about that. So let's start at the beginning. What exactly is a service animal? All right. Well, the legal definition under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is that a service animal is a dog, or in certain rare instances, a miniature horse, that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for a person with a disability. Okay. So think of it as an extension of the person with the disability, just like a cane or, a power chair or something else. Okay. The animal must be task oriented. All right. We're going to make a distinction between service animals and emotional support animals or comfort animals. Okay. So it's got to be task oriented, not comfort oriented. And we'll talk about that more further. So some examples are guiding a blind handler across a street, or detecting a drop of blood in glucose to prevent a seizure, or interpreting a PTSD flashback, or, all these things are covered tasks for a service animal. Okay. And I don't want to say simply, but by simply providing emotional support, that doesn't constitute a service animal. Okay. That's an emotional support animal. And again, we'll talk about that further, because there may be rights there in housing and other places where an emotional support animal can be appropriate and is recognized. All right. Because there is a dividing line between service animals and emotional support animals. Right now, we're focused on service animals. All right. Let's bust a couple of myths. All right. Myth number one that I think I hear most is that these service animals need like identification, like a special vest or papers or some registration or something. No ID or paperwork is required. The ADA is very clear on this and says it prevents businesses from demanding certification, registration, or, fancy harnesses or things like that. Identify them. Don't need to provide that. Okay. So myth one busted. So I would beware of any online registries, or there's these things on some sites where they'll sell you a certificate or a vest. Those really hold no value, zero weight. I wouldn't put your money there. Myth two is that a staff can ask for medical proof. Like you're out at a restaurant and the maitre d' comes up and says, "Oh, I need proof that this is a service animal." No. Again, the ADA is clear on this. And when I was director of the Office on Disability, we put out a guide on this, and there are only two questions that can be asked. It's in the ADA guidance. And so employees may only ask those two questions when it's not obvious that the dog is a service animal. Okay. So if the person is obviously blind and they have a white cane and they also come in with the service dog, and it's obvious that that's a service animal, then you can't even ask the two questions. Okay. But the two questions are, is this dog a service animal? And is it required with your disability? And then number two, what work or task is the dog trained to perform? That's it. Those are the only two questions you can ask. All right. So you can't demand the handler to disclose their disability or to demonstrate the task. The dog isn't doing tricks
or to produce medical records. Okay. None of that can happen. All right. You've got to think of this as an extension, as a tool really for the person with the disability. This dog is providing independence and self-determination for that person, and we need to respect that. All right. Now, there are handler responsibilities as well. All right. So with rights come duties. That's like an old adage. And so the dog must remain under control and be leashed and harnessed. Like it's not, immune to all of the other animal control laws. So like, if your city or town requires that your dog is licensed, then okay, that's appropriate for public health and everything else. Okay. So there are some responsibilities, or many responsibilities, for the handler as well, because this dog, these are highly trained animals. There's a lot of time and money and resources invested in them. So believe me, it's in the handler's best interest to make sure that that dog is well cared for in many ways. That includes remaining under control and, being house trained. And, it's going to be rare that a service animal is going to be out of control and is not going to be housebroken. Okay. That's generally like the dog has to be sick for that to happen, basically. Okay. So, care and supervision being provided for these animals really is excellent, because think about it. Like, you're asking this dog to transport you across a busy intersection in traffic. So of course you want that dog to be able to perform well when it needs to. All right. So the general tip here, my tip that I would give everybody on both sides, both the handlers, the people with disabilities, and the Title III people, the places of public accommodation. So your restaurants, your, hospitals, any place that the dogs, that these service animals are, is show mutual respect. Okay. Access paired with accountability is what we're looking for here. Okay. Understanding that there's responsibilities on both sides. So there are some instances where a business can say, no, this service animal is not allowed. Okay. But they're narrow. Okay. And that is really failure for these two questions. So number one, the dog isn't housebroken and is making a mess everywhere. And again, if it's a truly trained service dog, that's going to be exceedingly rare. And then number two, that the dog is out of control, or the handler isn't able to, control the dog. Again, exceedingly rare for that to happen. But those are the grounds that a business, if the dog is acting up and, then the business can take action there. Okay. But again, that's probably unlikely. If the dog isn't really behaving, good chances are it's probably not a service animal. All right. And then even if it is removed, even if the dog is removed, you still can't discriminate against the person. Like if they're ordering food or whatever service they're getting, whatever, you still have to be able to provide those services in another way. Like, look, your dog's out of control. I'll meet you at the curb to be able to give you your whatever, XYZ product or service. Okay. So like a scenario there would be like, it's a very crowded grocery store and there's other service animals in there. And, one service animal, they just don't agree for whatever reason. And then the grocery manager would get involved and say, hey, I have other service animals in the store right now. What service can we provide to be able to problem solve her? Can we give you curbside pickup? Is there an alternative here? And go through that as a process. Okay. That would be like an extenuating circumstance, I guess. But for the most part, that's not going to come into play because these service animals are very well trained, which means they're very well behaved and they're under control of the handler. They're there to provide access and independence for that person. All right. So another couple of things, like people think like, oh, well, you can't take the service dog here or there. No, you really can take a service dog pretty much into any place of public accommodation. All right. Now, within the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, Title III is places of public accommodation. So that includes all government agencies and buildings and offices, restaurants, hotels, buses, pretty much every place you can think of that you could go as a member of the public, your service animal has the right to escort you there. Could there be exceptions for like a burn unit in a hospital? Okay, maybe, or, something like, very extenuating circumstance. But for the most part, that service animal is an extension of the handler, of the person with the disability, and has the same rights that that person with the disability has to be able to travel freely throughout our society, okay? So there are a couple of exemptions. For example, religious institutions like churches. Those are not places of public accommodation in every context because they're private and the particular religious service is exempt under the Americans with Disabilities Act, okay? However, many or most churches still allow service animals, okay? And again, provided that the dog is under control and, is housebroken and all that. All right, let's just spend a moment just on the delineation between emotional support animals and service animals. And there is a dividing line there. The ADA, and they've put out guidance within the past probably 8 to 10 years on this. And clarity is still evolving, okay? But emotional support animals are not covered by the ADA's public access rules, okay? Though they may receive housing or air travel protections under like the Air Carrier Access Act or fair housing laws. Okay, those are different environments, so they may have protections there, emotional support animals. Okay, but the takeaway is we shouldn't conflate emotional support animals with service animals. Okay, doing that is like kind of undermines the whole legitimacy of these animals, and we don't want to do that. There are some other layers to this as well, like state and local governments, for example. So the federal rules is what we've been talking about so far, those laws and regulations that have been promulgated through primarily the ADA, but other laws as well. That's the floor, not the ceiling. Okay, so states and localities, they can grant more rights and make it more accessible, but they can't have fewer rights or make it more difficult for service animals in the ADA baseline, okay? So like, for example, some states recognize service animals in training and, in other ways to make it easier for service animals to be able to travel into more places, all right? So, but you got to know your jurisdiction. This might not apply to your state or your city or town, so you got to check that out. There's a couple of calls to action here, all right? The first one is to business owners to train staff, know what you're talking about, know your rights because you do have rights. Okay. So post and clear signage, making sure that people aren't discriminated against is the number one thing. You want to be a business that attracts people, not keeps people away. All right. So kind of like common sense types of things. And then for handlers, make sure you know your rights and responsibilities. Okay. So that means you've got to maintain impeccable control over your animal and, because your conduct shapes perception. And there's been very few instances over the years that we've come across where it's actually like the handler or the dog. It usually is on the other side, like people not understanding. But in certain instances, there have been times where the dog, for whatever reason, or the handler, for whatever reason, wasn't able to perform. Again, those two things where it wasn't housebroken or it got out of control. All right. So, we want to make sure people are traveling independently. People with disabilities, service animals are a vital element of their independence. This is all about access to opportunities, independence, and self-determination. I hope you got something out of this episode. Let us know in the comments if you want to hear more or if we can provide value for you. It's David Darkangelo, another episode of Save Visibility. I hope you have a great day.
For more information about disability employment issues, please visit our website, disabilityemploymentsolutions.com. The Save As Ability podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel at Disability Policy Expert, or wherever you stream your podcasts. Subscribe, stream, rate, and review our shows. Your ratings and reviews help our show reach new audiences. Produced by Pod Pro Entertainment. Save As Ability lives within a network of podcasts located at podproentertainment.com. #TheNewRadio. Again, my name is David Darkangelo, and I'm your disability policy expert. Until next time, thank you. I hope you have a great day.